talk about the circular flow of the economy and GDP. I was thinking on the way home, I was listening to Marketplace, and I was thinking, oh, this is a perfect thing to talk about because it is truly economics 101, and it can truly help you understand what happens when you put money into the economy. How does it work its way through? And I also was thinking, I love teaching it because pretty soon you're going to be smarter than most people in Congress because they don't seem to understand the circular flow of the economy. So hopefully I'll do my job and you guys will be outsmarting our Congress people any day now.
Pretty much anyone can outsmart Congress nowadays.
That's true, but that's true. It's a low bar. So SIGX is going to be really important. Just kind of keep it in the back of your mind. It does become the most important sort of formula in economics. And these become the four things that shift the aggregate demand curve, which we'll get to in Unit 3. So the circular flow of the economy, okay? So we're dealing with, this is the simple circular flow. We're dealing with two main groups, businesses and households. And we have two markets, the resource market and the product market, okay? And so we'll just go through and show how these groups and these markets interact, okay? So doesn't matter where you start, it is a circle, right? Circles kind of are all continuous, but we're gonna start here. We're gonna start with households in the resource market. Another word for the resource market is the factor market, right? And we've heard the word factor before, right? Factors of production. In the resource market, households sell the factors of production. They sell their land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship to businesses. Simply, what does that mean? It means I give my labor to Dade County Public Schools, right? I rent my building to Starbucks or Chipotle, right? I come up with new ideas. And those go to businesses, right? In return for giving my labor, for giving my land, for giving my capital to businesses, right? Businesses give to me, they pay me rent for my land, they pay me wages for my labor, they pay me interest for my capital if they rent a machine from me, and I get profits when I'm an entrepreneur. And these represents costs for the businesses. Okay? When a business has to pay me my wages, that's a cost to the business. So very simply, in the resource market, we have households giving their factors of production, and in return, households get paid. Okay? Looks maybe complicated, but it's relatively simple idea. Now that I'm making all this money from Dade County Public Schools, what do? Now I can take that and go into the product market. And so I take that money, or businesses take my labor, and we're starting at the other side. Businesses take my labor. Starbucks takes the factors of production and they create goods and services. And those goods and services come back to households, right? I can go buy a cup of coffee, I can go see a movie, I can go take a trip, or I could go take a trip, right? And I give businesses my consumption, right? I give them my money, which is known as consumption, okay? And this represents revenue for business. And now what do businesses do with all that money that they take in? They pay the households. What do households do with the money they make from the businesses after paying all their bills and stuff? They spend it at the businesses to get goods and services. And then households make the goods and services by selling their land, labor, and capital to businesses. That's the simple circular flow between businesses and households. And again, this is where I think Congress messes up a little bit, because so many in Congress want to give money to the businesses. They want to help out the businesses, give money, give bailouts, not really bailouts, but the airline industry and things like this, without understanding there we go. What happens when you give money to the households? Where does it go? It goes to the businesses, right? So they think it's a zero-sum game. They think help households or help businesses. When the reality is you help the households and you end up helping the businesses too because they spend their money there. Okay? So that's the simple circular flow. But there's more to it than that, okay? Let's look at the other parts of the circular flow. It's not just households here on the bottom. It's not just businesses here. There are other groups in the economy, okay? Some of my money gets spent back at the businesses, but some of my money I put in banks. Some of my money I pay in taxes. Some of my money I don't buy from an American company, I buy from a foreign company, okay? So anytime I'm saving money, anytime I'm paying my taxes to the government, anytime I buy something from abroad, if I buy a French wine or a German beer or a Japanese car, these are called leakages from the circular flow. It's money that is leaving this simple one that I showed you before, okay? Now, what happens to this money? What happens to the money I save? Well, I save money in the bank. What do banks do? They lend money to businesses. That's called investment. And so the money that I save becomes investment to businesses. What happens to my tax money that the government collects? That becomes government spending. And what happens to the money that I give to people in Japan and France and Germany? They take that money and buy things from us. Those are called injections back into the economy. And if you look, I talked about SIGEX at the very beginning. There you have all of the things that make up GDP. You have consumption, things that are bought by households. You have investment. This is done by businesses. You have government spending, which is done by the government. And you have, it's actually called net exports, exports minus imports, and that becomes spending by foreigners. And when you add up all these, when you add up consumption and investment and government spending, that makes up a country's GDP. And that's the way that we'll be concerned with mostly, is with those four. Okay? So let's look at GDP. Let's look at the definition. The definition of gross domestic product, let me move this maybe, is the total value of all goods and services, well, I can't move it there, let's see. Of all goods and services produced within the borders of a country in a particular year, okay? The total value of all goods and services produced within the borders of a country within a given year. So let's look at what we count and what we don't count. The big thing that we want to avoid when we count GDP is we want to avoid double counting, right? We want to make this as accurate as possible. We don't want to count the same thing twice. My dog is being really funny right now. She's laying on her back and chewing on her leg, like the hyenas from Lion King. All right, so we only include final goods and services. Final goods are goods that are ready for consumption, ready for final sale. Intermediate goods are goods that require further processing before they can be considered for consumption. So I put a picture of tires right there, right? If I'm Toyota, no, I won't use Toyota. If I'm Ford and I buy tires from Goodyear, I'm going to put those on my car. Those tires are an intermediate good, right? They're not going to be ready for consumption until they're on that car. So we don't count the tires, but we do count the car. Things that we don't count as part of GDP. We don't count black market goods, right? Drug transactions, things that are stolen maybe, stolen goods. We don't count financial transactions. We don't count stock and bond purchases, things like that. We don't count used goods because those were counted in the year that they were produced. So if I buy a 3-year-old guitar, right, we're not going to count that because it was counted when it was bought new. And we don't count transfer payments. Transfer payments are payments from the government to its citizens. Things like Social Security, things like unemployment. Because what happens? If we count $1,000 that the government gives me, ostensibly, what am I going to do with that money? I'm going to spend it, and that would be double counting. So those are the things that are not counted. So here we go, SIGEX. We add up all of these things, and this will give us a country's GDP. The C is spending by consumers. 75% or so, 70% or so of our GDP is consumption spending. It's done by consumers. This is another great reason to put money in the come here, Temby. That's another great reason to put money in the hands of the consumers because they're the one that drive our GDP. Investment, I sub G means gross private domestic investment. This is what businesses spend. And what do businesses invest in? They invest in capital, right? They buy a new car machine to make a car. They buy a new tractor for their farm. They buy a new printing press or whatever. G is government spending, anything that the government buys, new tanks, new airplanes, building hospitals, whatever. And then we have net exports. All purchases made by other countries minus the purchases made by our country. That can be a negative number. We add up all of these things and that will give us our GDP. Okay? There are two other methods of calculating GDP. Know that these exist, but you do not have to know how to do them. You will need to know how to add up SIGACs. You will need to pick those out of a list. Just know that there are other ways, because we will talk about them, but you don't need to know how to actually do them. The first one is value-added approach, all the sales minus the cost of inputs. And there's the income approach. We add up all the income earned by the factors of production. Remember, I sell my, or I give my land, or I rent my land to Starbucks, so I get paid rent. You add up all the wages, you add up all the interest, you add up all the profits, plus a few other things, and that will get you to national income and another way of calculating GDP. Okay? And if you think about it, it should make sense, right? My wages, what do my wages become? They eventually become consumer spending. Okay? So know that these exist, but you'll never have to actually do the computation to get there.